I'm excited today to have David Dial on the podcast. David is an author, professional speaker, trainer, consultant, and coach. With over 30 years of recruiting and HR consulting experience, he advises business leaders on how to accomplish ambitious endeavors. David was the CEO of a high growth company for 2.5 years, so he has an intimate knowledge of the challenges and dilemmas that business leaders face. He works with companies around the US, Canada, and Western Europe, working with leaders to uncover obstacles, overcome constraints, develop strategic plans, and implement integrated development programs. The goal is to transform groups of employees into high performance teams and release untapped human potential. David, I'm so glad you're here. Thanks for being on the show.
Well, thanks for having me.
Welcome to Catalytic Leadership, the podcast designed to help leaders intentionally grow and thrive. Here is your host, author, and leadership and executive coach, Dr. William Attaway.
I would love to start with you sharing a little bit of your story with our listeners, David, particularly around your journey and your development as a leader. How did you get started?
Well, I mean, from an entrepreneurial point of view, I guess my first job was I was a magician when I was about 12, and I liked magic, and so I just was doing it. And then I was doing birthday parties around the neighborhood and getting paid for it. That was kind of fun. And that, I kind of get that idea of, hey, I can do something I really like, and I can make money doing it. So I was about 15, 16 years old, and I was at a school dance, and I really thought the DJ was a cool guy. And so I convinced my dad to co-sign a loan for me, and I bought all the equipment to become a mobile DJ. So I did that into university actually age. And I started a couple of smaller companies after university with some friends. But I was looking for what I wanted to do. I was in sales coming out of university, and enjoyed that part of it, but was really looking for, I guess something a little bit more in terms of that. And I wasn't really sure. I was kind of searching around. So I just actually answered an ad in the paper one day, and I became a recruiter, because
Wow.
recruiters are essentially salespeople
Yeah,
when it comes down
sure.
to it, right? Right at the very core of what they do on both sides, the candidate side and the client side. And I became successful at that. I was running 4 branches for a company, one in Portland, one in Vancouver here in Canada, one in Calgary where I live, and one in Ottawa down in Eastern Canada. And just through a series of different events, I just decided that I could do this on my own. So I borrowed a desk and a phone. I started making phone calls, and I started making placements, and I started building a recruiting company. We really built that company up over about 5 years. With employees, we were really getting to a stage where I thought we could take it to a sort of a regional level, not just a local level. And then 9/11 happened, and
Mm.
the bottom fell out of the recruiting industry. We went from record months of revenue to zero in under 30 days. So, big lesson learned from running your own organization like that is, like, you need to have a cushion. You need to be able to have a few months worth of, funds available so that you can pay all your bills while you're waiting for the market to come back. So that was a real decision point for me. It was a moment of, not just a moment of choice, but a moment of truth. So really enjoyed what I was doing. And what I discovered was that in order to be successful as a recruiter, what I was doing a lot of was working with my clients to ensure they had the right onboarding, that their managers were set for new employees. And the more that I did that, the higher the lower the replacement level went. Let's put it that way. The success level went up in terms of people staying successfully. And I decided, you know what? I think this is a really good opportunity for me to pivot the business in that direction, something I really enjoy.
Yeah.
Over about 6 months, I helped all of my employees find jobs with other recruiting agencies or doing something else, and became basically a solopreneur at that point, and started building this idea of, how do I help, building teams that accomplish dreams? How do I work with companies to translate that strategy that they've got, that vision that they've got, into results?
Mm.
And so I started doing a lot of work in that vein, starting from the HR point of view, but then getting a lot more into the leadership aspect of it. So how do leaders affect what's going on? Not just your managers, not just your employees, but how do we integrate the whole aspect of this, from strategic to operational to tactical? And so started doing that, started doing a lot of workshops, working with a lot of teams. So started working with clients as a fractional VP of HR, where I would basically embed myself with them. My longest running client was about 14 years. And so I'll, go in and work with them where I can work side by side with their managers and leaders, and we can start to develop processes and practices for them to improve. So that's a bit of my journey over the last 30 years. So
My goodness, so much of your work is, I mean, it really illustrates that there is no wasted experience. As you have moved along this,
yeah,
every piece has really contributed to the next chapter
right. It has.
and
Yeah.
into making you the person, the leader that you are today.
It did. And, there was a, in the fall of 2020, what is this now? So like in the fall of 2023, I was involved with a company, and I was an investor in this company, an indoor vertical farming company. So, growing strawberries indoors without sunlight, even when it's minus 30 outside here in Canada. And there was an opportunity where they asked me, would you like to become the CEO? And I said, okay. And so we took that from proof of concept right through to the cusp of commercialization. So that exposed me a lot to the finance side, raising money, really having a really clear handle on the market that we were dealing with and how we access the market. So I learned a lot from that as well. I also learned that being the CEO is probably not the best role for me. So I did enjoy it, but I think what I learned was that I bring far more value when I'm working within the team to help the team be stronger, as opposed to having to be the visionary leader of the team. I can do that. I proved to myself that I could do it. But now coming back in the last year and a half, or last year actually, back to my practice and working with clients and new clients, I'm really bringing that value again, and much quicker than I used to.
And I think you can speak into them now, into your clients now, from a place of, hey, I've been there,
Yeah, I
know what
think,
you're going through.
and I think you've been here too. I mean, at certain times when you're working with leaders and managers and teams, you need to be the firm voice of reason, which is,
Yeah.
I think you're hiding. I think you're
Yeah.
letting your fear overtaking what you really want to have happen here. Right. And I
Yeah.
think that, that's affecting how you're making decisions and choices, and that's taking you down the wrong path to where you
Mm.
want to go. So if you really want to be successful, you need to, take the time to be able to look at, who am I as a leader? What choices am I making as a leader?
Mhm.
And is that really supporting and serving the vision that we've got? And sometimes you got to do what scares you. Like you just do.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. You
Yeah,
move toward the mess. You move through the fear, you know?
exactly. Yeah.
I love that. So, thinking through some of the clients that you've served, can you
Right.
share a story or two of how you have served them and some of the things you've seen as they move to the other side of their fear?
Sure. I've worked with, um, I can think, the longest serving client I've had in 14 years. I knew the owner very well. They were an insurance brokerage, had probably about, the time I started with them, they were probably about 50 people. When we finished, we were about 105, 110. He
Wow.
ended up selling to a much larger insurance company here in Canada. But at that time, he said, look, I've taken this as far as I can go, right? As
Hmm.
with my skill set. And what he wanted to do was build an organization where, the team was running the company. He didn't have to feel like he was
Yeah.
always inside running the company, right? And being
Yeah.
that person they always went to. So it was like, okay, how can we help this team to be able to do it? And they had some very strong people, but they hadn't really figured out the spectrum between management on one side and leadership on the other, because they're two different pieces. Sometimes they meet more towards the middle, but sometimes
Mhm.
when you're managing, you're executing and you're looking at process and you're looking at how things are there. And on leading, the other side of that, you're looking at practices and experience and knowledge and how we're
Yeah.
applying that to the processes that we're using. So how do we put these things together? So the challenge, and I think this is a challenge that a lot of people in a lot of different industries face, is that, there are lots of experienced people out there, but do we necessarily want all of them? Right. So
Yeah.
we want certain types of people who fit our culture. Just because you have 20 plus years of whatever and whatever, company, that you might not be
Yeah.
right for this company. Right. The
That's right.
experience is not just what you need. You also need that fit and where the company goes and their buy-in. So we started building a system where we would attract who we wanted from those very experienced people. And at the same time, we started building a process to say, how would we build our own very successful insurance brokers?
Mm.
What are the processes? Who are the people? How would we train them? And it took us probably about 2.5, 3 years to do that. But
Mm.
at the end of that, we got to a point where we no longer felt like we were held hostage to this sort of shortage of experienced people out there. We could bring in the ones who really bought into us. But at the same time, we could go and say, look, we can find a really bright, really enthusiastic person who fits our culture, who really wants this as a career. And now we have a way of saying, this is where we would start you. And then within about 2 years, you could be an experienced broker who's really enjoying their career.
I love
And
that.
so that, when you talk about taking the people, the managers that I was dealing with had a real fear of, am I smart enough? Am I good enough? And all those sorts of things. And it was like, well, some of them were like, you've got 20 years of experience doing this. You need to rely on the fact that you know how to do this. Right? We just have to figure out the process for being able to train other people on what you know how to do. Right? And we need to attract the right person who's going to soak that up and really do something with it. Right?
That's true.
And so guiding them through those fears were, sometimes you just have to do it. You know what I mean? It's like, let it go and say, I accept the fact that I fear about this, or my emotions, or whatever the emotions I'm feeling are at the time. But if I accept that, I understand how they affect me and those around me, and we can overcome that. Let's just do what needs to be done. So one step at a time. Right?
Do you ever find that clients push back on that? Do you ever find that they say, I don't know if I can do that?
They do.
And really struggle.
Sometimes overcoming certain fears is daunting, right? Because they're so ingrained in who we are and how long that we've had them, right? That we don't actually even realize sometimes. Like I'll have clients who push back at me who don't even realize that they're coming from a place of fear.
Right. Exactly.
They've got all these self-defense mechanisms and all these things put in place, this armor in place to be able to protect them from this thing that they really fear. That they are saying, look, I'm good. You don't have to talk to me about this. I'm fine. And then what we do is over time we go, but the results that you're actually achieving are actually counterproductive to what you want to try and do, because there's something deeper under here that you've got a conflict with, between what I want to do and what I am doing. So what is that? And that usually comes to some sort of a fear. So if we can uncover that and say, look, it's okay. We're supposed to have emotions. The whole idea is we have emotions. We aren't our emotions.
That's right.
Right. We have fears, and it's natural for us to have fears because that's how we've survived as a species. Right. Is being selective about that. But what am I buying into? And I think at a point like that, we start getting into a discussion of what is it that I'm making up in my head that isn't true. That's holding me back. I'm telling myself a story inside of my head that I'm not sharing with anybody else. That's actually holding me back from this next step. I've lived through it myself. I've had to overcome a lot of fears. I've had to overcome a lot of places where it was like, wow, can I really do this?
Yeah.
And, the short answer to that is, well, if I do it and I fail, it's about the same as me not doing it and being a failure right now. Which one is the best one to do?
That's so good.
I mean, as long as, you don't like hurt yourself, just put it that way.
Right.
You're not bungee
Definitely
jumping off a, 200-story building or something.
That's interesting. I often talk with clients about this too. And I say that emotions are necessary passengers in your car, but you should never let them drive.
Right.
Because you will end up in a ditch 100% of the time. That's not how we're intended to use them. I love how you said that, we are not our emotions. We have them, but we are not them.
And when we start to get to the point where we can accept that and then say, look, if I can really do this, I mean, I run into, especially with, say, founders, people who are still running their organization, they've been doing it for a long time. It's so tied to their identity that what happens is when things aren't going their way or people aren't doing exactly what they want, that's where anger starts to jump in.
Yep.
Right. And when they start to get angry, of course, that can destroy relationships. That really kills morale. It does a lot of different things. But really, that anger is a way of them trying to protect themselves from something that they're really afraid of. Right. So if I can look at it and say, and I've worked with people who are like, I'm not angry. I'm not an angry person. And it's like, let's just go back, and I've made notes. Let's talk about different situations that you've done this in. And that idea is that, okay, well, first of all, it's okay to be angry sometimes. It's an emotional reaction. But if you can look at it and start to go look at, well, how do my emotions affect me? Because I know that when people get angry, after they calm down, they usually feel a lot of guilt about being angry. So that's not serving me at all. Right. Yeah. So how does that emotion affect me, and how would I like to change that in terms of how I just work with myself? And then second of all, how does that emotion affect those around me? right? So if you've got managers who, don't delegate or won't take risks or aren't doing these things that you really want them to, it's usually because they're standing back a little bit because they know if they take the next step, you're probably going to yell at them, or you're going to get mad at them, or you're going to do something because you didn't do it exactly the way you wanted them to do it. And so they've learned this about you. And so now what you've really done is, by not understanding how the emotion affects that person, you've stunted them a little bit in terms of them being able to take a risk or being able to stretch themselves or being able to do something a little bit out of the box, right? Because
Yeah.
they don't want to get yelled at. Let's put it that way.
Hmm. Hmm. So well said. When you're thinking about the clients that you work best with,
Mhm.
the clients that you would consider to be, these are the ones that are the target,
Right.
my ideal client avatar. Like,
Sure.
how would you describe that? If people are listening, they're like, am I the right person to work with David? How would you describe them?
I I find this is that, I've done a lot of work like strategically and strategic planning, etc. But that's not really the point of what I do. Is that I can do that, but what I like to be able to do, what I believe I bring the most value to do, is to work with that leader and say, tell me what your vision is. And it
Mm,
can be a full blown strategic plan, or you've done a lot of work on it, or it's just tell me, empty out your thoughts of, in 3 to 5 years, what does this place look like that it doesn't look like
yes.
today? How can I help you to actually take and translate that vision into something now that we can put into an operational implementable plan, right? And how can we then find out, do you have the right people to be able to implement that plan? A lot of times the visionary is not the person who should be implementing anything.
That's true.
They shouldn't be, right? Because they get caught in the
That's very
details and
true.
they're too worried about the outcome, and
Yeah.
they don't let people kind of use their strengths. So
Yeah.
you need a good person who's good at implementing, saying, okay, great. If this is the plan and this is the process and where we want to go, I'm really good at being able to get this done. Right.
Mhm.
When we start to attract the people and give them work on their strengths and their competencies to say, look, you're really good at this. We really want you to push this as far as you can go. We're not going to worry about
Mhm.
putting in all the stuff that you don't have. We just want
Yeah.
to pull out everything that you do have and really help you
That's
grow.
good.
And along the way, you're going to add more skills and competencies. So those clients who are able to say, I can describe my vision and it means so much to me that I'm willing to let go.
Mhm.
Because a lot of
Hmm.
times the clients
That's
that I
good.
know that I don't work with are the ones who won't let go, need to control everything, right? So at that
Yeah.
point, then you need to make a decision. Maybe you need to just be on a smaller scale where you make less money, but you can control everything. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But if you want to scale and if you want to grow and if you want this to be bigger, then you need at some point to let go and trust that things will get done while you can go and do other things. So let's free you up to go to do what you're really good at while we have a team that actually implements for you.
I love that. David, let's talk about you for a minute. You have to lead your practice at a higher level today,
Hmm.
lead your clients and your team at a higher level
Right.
today than you did, a couple years ago.
Right.
The same thing's going to be true 3, 4,
Mhm.
5 years from now.
Right.
How do you stay on top of your game? How do you level up with the leadership skills that your clients and your team are going to need you to have?
I started doing this maybe, gosh, it's got to be like 20 years ago. Um, I stopped buying into the flavor of the month in terms of what was the latest management fad or somebody's interpretation of whatever it was to be able to, get, huge success or something, right? And learning to trust myself in terms of what I understood and what I knew. Okay. Who am I as a person and a leader? So that was a good place to start. And then it was really going back and trying to get to the fundamental ideas of what leadership is all about. And there are certain tenets. I mean, this goes back to ancient writing. This goes back to
Mhm.
Stoicism. This goes back to, Greek philosophy and Roman philosophy. All those are there. It's really hard to go back and read that, though. I mean, you might have done this,
Mhm.
right? You go back and you can read Marcus Aurelius,
Mhm.
meditations and stuff. It's hard
Yeah.
to pull out the principles and then say, how do I apply these principles, right? Because he was thinking in a Stoic manner, right? So
Right.
you can take that. And I think one of the biggest ones I learned from that was that dichotomy um, of thought, the dichotomy of choice. This is like, I have a choice. What can I control? Or, sorry, the dichotomy of control. What can I control and what can't I control?
Right.
If I can't control it, why do I spend a lot of time there? And we do spend a lot of time in our minds worrying about things we have absolutely no control over.
Yes.
Focus on what you can control, and then you'll expand your sphere of influence. So that became sort of a guiding principle for me in terms of understanding that. And then I started reading some other ideas going down that idea of the power of thought. So one that I regularly go back to is James Allen, as Man Thinketh.
That's what I think
And
of.
that's really
Yeah.
about power of thought and how you can just think about, and it's really just being aware of, how do I think? Is it negative or positive? And how does it affect me? And how does it help me grow? And if you can do that every day, thinking more positively than negatively, then you're normally going on the right thing. I also really enjoyed reading Ellen Langer and Mindfulness,
Yes.
which was, the idea. And she was, she's a professor, a psychology professor at Harvard. She was the first female ever to get tenure in psychology at Harvard. And she did a lot of psychological research into mindfulness, right? And I really loved it, because when I start talking about mindfulness, people think you got to be a guru and go meditate and do all sorts of stuff, right? To be this mindfulness person. And I really liked the way that she put it, that you can really understand, which is, if you're not mindful, then you're mindless. And the idea is, right?
That's
And the
great.
idea is, when you're mindless, is that you're just following the routines and the habits and the things that go on. And that's how you operate. You're kind of on autopilot. When you become mindful, you start to think about, what am I thinking about? Or how am I making decisions? I slow down enough to understand that's being mindful,
Yeah.
right? I'm being
That's good.
mindful about how I operate in the world, and really getting a better sense of what I do. So that idea of that mindfulness for me, and especially now, after, again, looking at the practice side of it, after you've got so much knowledge and experience, that you start to let go of the fact that I'm not the smartest person in the room. And I'm not trying to prove that I'm the smartest person in the room.
Right.
I'm just trying to help people to get to a place of, have we really thought carefully about the decisions we're going to make here?
Yeah.
Right.
I love that.
And, does that help us get to the outcomes that you want? Right. So, for me,
Yeah.
again, it's sticking to those basic tenets, helping people understand that, and then saying, look, then you're allowed to be who you are and what you're talented at and what you're brilliant at. And we don't have to worry about a whole bunch of rules or, slick, sort of ideas about, there are people writing some book about, hey, here's the 15 steps to success. It's like, you don't have to do that. You can use your own brilliance and your own talent based on some really strong principles and be an awesome leader.
So true. So much of it is really about asking the right questions, like
Oh,
you're
sure.
describing.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how you get the right answers. So many of us are asking the wrong questions, and it just takes us askew.
Yeah.
I think that's so well said. So thinking about your entrepreneurial journey, you've had a lot of experiences along the way, from
Right.
that kid who was doing, the DJ thing,
Yeah.
magic,
Yeah.
all the way to today.
Mhm.
Some people might look at you from the outside and look at your highlight reel
Right.
and say, "Oh man, David, his journey's just been up and to the right. Like, he's never really struggled. He's
Right.
never really had the challenges that I deal with as an entrepreneur."
Right.
If somebody were to say that to you, how would you respond to that?
Well, it's the ups and downs. Everyone wants to look at, what is success, right? And how do we define success? And that's usually sort of based on things that are external to who you are. It's usually based on, what kind of job do I have? How much money do I make? What kind of office do I have? What, how do I have a trophy spouse? Do I, what kind of car do I drive? All those things, which are so external. And they tend to say, hey, wow, now I know guys who, you meet them and they're fabulously wealthy. They got, 2 or 3 houses, they got, cars and whatever it is, and you look at them, and then once you get to know them, you find out that they're profoundly some of the most depressed and unfulfilled people that you're ever going to find, because they're not actually getting what they need by this idea of success. Okay.
Right.
And so I look at it sometimes and I say, well, I gauge success sometimes on how well you're able to deal with adversity and struggle. So when people say that, it's like, no, this just didn't happen overnight. Like I struggled. Like I said, I borrowed a desk and a phone. We had a son who was about 7 months old. My wife was pregnant with our second son. You know, this was our livelihood. We had to pay the mortgage. We were at that stage in our life, and it was like, okay, I've got to like really go through this. And it was a struggle. I mean, you don't just pick up a phone and start phoning people and all of a sudden you're making a lot of money. It took
Right.
a lot of effort. It took a lot of that. When we got to a certain point and 9/11 happened, again, we went from record months of revenue to zero in 30 days. And I didn't have and I hadn't thought about putting the money aside to be able to run the business for 6 months or a year, right? So a good management consulting company, whatever it is, will always have a contingency fund to be able to weather any storms, because there's always ups and downs, right? So,
That's right.
that wasn't so great. I had to find jobs for all my people. I had to pivot the whole business. I had to, put my house on the line. I had to do a bunch of things to keep the business going. And, there were times, even then when, it's like, if you want to be a real entrepreneur, right? This is one of my areas that you can know you're a real entrepreneur when you cash advance your visa for payroll.
Mm.
Are you that committed?
Wow.
Right. And I can tell you, I cash advance my visa to cover payroll. So, cash flow, and it's understanding those things. And, you get to a certain level and a certain time where people go, wow, like, how did you learn this? And it was like, well, I learned it by struggling. I learned it by going through periods of, profound disappointment at times, right? That things weren't going my way. But the idea is that's not what defines you.
Mm-hmm.
It's what you do about it that actually defines you.
So good.
Right.
Mm. David, let's say you had the ability to go back, given all the things that you know now, go back and talk to that 9-year-old kid.
Right.
What would you love to go back and tell yourself?
Well, I think it's what I've begun telling my 61-year-old self.
Mm.
And that's just be in the moment. And don't define yourself by your past, because it's the past. You can't do anything about it. You can't change it. And don't live in the future. Don't live in the what ifs, or when this happens, or, when I do this, I'm going to be able to do that. And I'm going to be successful when I, do this. It's like, have goals, have your plan, have what you want to do in terms of your vision, but then bring back yourself every day into the moment and say, what is it I can be doing right now today to help me advance towards that? Okay.
Yeah.
What am I doing right in this moment? And who am I right in this moment?
Yeah,
And
that's good.
accept that person.
Good.
Right.
I like
and
that.
that's what I would tell my 9-year-old self. It's what I would tell myself today. It's not what I was telling myself in my 30s and my 40s. I can tell you that much.
Work harder, do more.
Exactly. With less.
That's right.
So,
That's right. That is a common refrain, I think,
I think so, yeah.
At that point, you're like me, you're a continual learner. You're always learning, you're always growing. Is there a book that has made a really big difference in your journey that you would recommend to the leaders who are listening?
I think that, like I said, there's, as man thinketh, by James Allen is one that is a good one for the power of thought. I think that if you're looking for a team, I don't even know if it's in print anymore, but it was called Playing to Win. And I think it was by a guy named Larry Wilson. Larry Wilson was a really successful insurance salesman, et cetera, became a motivational speaker, ended up building a place. It was called Pecos River, I think. And it was a team facilitation kind of center, but he started doing a lot of work with teams. And he wrote this book, I think with his son, called Playing to Win. And it was a lot of what we just sort of encapsulated in this conversation. And he had found a way to kind of bring it all together to be able to say, look are we playing to win, or are we playing not to lose? And that's a really good question to ask your team,
That's
right?
fantastic. Oh,
Like,
yeah.
are we playing to
Love
win,
that.
or are we playing just not to lose? Like, are we just going around doing CYA all day? We're not taking any risks. We're not doing whatever, sometimes we can say we're playing to win. So I got to go and take a risk. I got to try and do something different, or whatever it is, so that we can get to the next stage. That was a good book. And I think that was sort of early in my facilitation days and running workshops. And so I found that book to be very helpful in terms of just some core concepts of working with teams.
I love that. I haven't read that. I'm going to see if I can get a copy of that.
Yeah, I don't even know. I've got a copy, but I don't know if it's in print anymore. It might be, but yeah, playing to win, Larry Wilson. Yeah.
David, this has been a fascinating and insightful conversation. I'm so grateful for you sharing so generously today of your time and the insight that you've gained along the way. I know our listeners are going to want to stay connected to you and learn more about what you're doing.
Yeah.
What's the best way for them to do that?
I think right now, if you look me up on LinkedIn, you follow me on LinkedIn, connect with me on LinkedIn, that's the best way to find me. Obviously we got a website, but LinkedIn is where you'll see stuff that I'm posting, where you're going to see, different things that I'm offers it different things for free or whatever, resources, etc. And just, yeah, I'll be doing probably some events on LinkedIn, probably late this year into next year as well. So it's probably the best place to find me.